What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and recently I gave myself the challenge of putting together a gaming PC for the low price of $100. This took a lot of effort and I had to do some unorthodox stuff like make my own case to save money, but I'm pretty happy with the end result. For example, here's the system playing the new Cod War Zone at over 60 FPS. Sure, the settings are turned way down, but still for the price, this performance is great. What's also great is today's sponsor, Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. So like I said before, this PC cost me less than $100 to build and it can play a surprising number of games. If you've seen my other budget builds, then you probably know that for these low price systems, I go all out trying to find the best deals possible. From eBay to local deals, I try and do whatever I can to build the best PC for this set budget. And in this one, I built my own case for super cheap so I could keep the whole thing under the $100 price point. This PC may not be able to play all the latest AAA titles, but for stuff like Fortnite and CSGO, the system works great. So now that you have a base understanding of what this PC is, let's go ahead and talk about the parts that are in the system, starting with the CPU. The CPU I went with for this build is the Intel Core i3-4160. This is a 2-core 4-thread CPU running at 3.6 GHz. This is on the Haswell architecture and released in 2014, nearly 6 years ago. Sure, a higher core count CPU would have been nice, but for the system this worked great and performance was very respectable. The CPU actually came in a combo deal with a motherboard and cooler for right around $30. The motherboard this came with is a Dell branded board that was in a pre-built at some point. The layout is a little non-standard, but thankfully all the power headers, fan headers, and many of the other features are the same as what you'd find on a more standard motherboard. This only has 2 DIMM slots, which isn't ideal, but again worked fine, and even though there is 3 PCIe slots total, one of the 1X slots gets covered up by our graphics card. Overall, this isn't an amazing motherboard, but it fit into the budget and houses all the components just fine. To cool the CPU, the $30 bundle also included a basic Dell cooler that also was likely in a pre-build at some point. This is a relatively simple cooler, which is basically just a big hunk of aluminum, but it keeps our little i3 cool and quiet. Also, unlike a lot of other Dell motherboard slash coolers, this guy uses a standard fan connector, which is great to see and means adding an aftermarket cooler would be pretty easy and wouldn't require a fan adapter. Overall, for $30, getting this CPU, motherboard, and cooler was a pretty good deal, but I was actually able to get the price down a little bit more. This board actually came with a Wi-Fi card, which I wasn't going to need, so after a quick search I found these were selling for $5 or $6 on eBay. I listed mine, and after fees and whatnot, I was left with $4, which brings the net price of this bundle down to $26, making this an even better deal. Moving on to RAM, this is a place where I spent a little more than I would have liked to. I purchased a 2x8GB kit of G.Skill Aegis RAM for $40, and only used one 8GB stick, making it add $20 to the budget. Usually I can find 8GB kits for $15, but having a single stick means upgrading to 16GB in the future would be as easy as popping in another one. 8GB is plenty for most esports games and can be usable in a lot of AAA games. Obviously the standard in 2020 is 16GB, but for a system this low price, 8GB is gonna have to do. For storage, I just went with a used 500GB hard drive for $6. This is a Seagate Barracuda drive that runs at 7200 RPM. Buying used hard drives isn't always a great idea, but this one seems to run fine, and again for this budget it's going to have to do. 500GB isn't a crazy amount of storage, but it did fit Windows 10 and all the games tested, which was nice to see. In terms of the graphics card, I was originally going to go with this GTX 583GB that I got for around $30, but found it was incompatible with a lot of games, and for example Cod War Zone won't even start up with it installed. Because of this, I decided to switch it for a card that I have used in a previous build. This is an Nvidia Gtx 660 Ti. This is the Asus DirectCu 2 model, which has a pretty beefy heatsink with a dual fan design. I think it looks pretty nice, and for less than $35, the value for money is pretty darn good, which you'll see in the benchmarks. For the power supply, I went with a less than ideal unit. PSUs are really expensive right now, and the best I could get is this Raid Max unit rated at 530 watts. Again, this is not ideal, but for only $15, this was the best I could do. I know Raid Max isn't a reliable brand, but I've not had had any trouble with this unit thus far. Obviously only time will tell about how reliable it is, but for now it works just fine. It's semi-modular, which is cool to see, and has all the connectors I needed to power my build. Finally, let's talk about the case, and calling this a case is a bit generous. It's more of an open air chassis. I built this for under $10 in materials, and I'm gonna show you the basics of how I did it. I started off by opening up Google SketchUp and just played around until I found something that might work. I started off with 3 1x2 by 8 foot strips of wood. This is pretty much the cheapest wood you can get at $1.25 per strip and totaling $3.75 for all 3. I started by cutting down 12 14-inch pieces of wood using a stop block to ensure each piece was exactly the same size. I then cut 45-degree angles in each end of each piece. Once done, I was left with this. The plan was to make 3 squares like this, which I did with wood glue and some nails. I did this with all the pieces and was left with 3 basically identical squares, which would act as the outer frame that the inner frame would mount to. I used the power supply and another piece of wood to space things out for the power supply side. I used a combination of nails and a few screws to add the interior rectangle into the 3 squares that the motherboard would mount to. Once done, I was left with a cube that had one area for the motherboard and graphics card and a back area for the power supply and storage. I also used a 4-foot piece of angle aluminum I got for $2.50, and I used this to make brackets for things to mount to. I cut down each piece just using a hacksaw. I wanted to mount 2 pieces on the interior frame for the motherboard to mount to. I drilled 3 holes in each piece, then screwed them into the wood. With this done, I could lay the motherboard into place and mark for standoff holes. I drilled a bunch of mounting holes and installed a standoff in each. Then I test fit another piece of aluminum to act as the PCIe bracket for the graphics card to get support from. I next needed to modify this piece a little, then screwed it into place. Finally, I added a bracket that the power supply would mount to on the back. With everything done and installed, I added an open air case with a dual chamber design. Again, this cost under $10, factoring in the wood, metal, wood glue, nails, and a couple screws. Overall, for $10, I'm pretty happy with the end result, and I'm interested in to hear what you guys think of this. I may try and make something similar to this with nicer wood and taking more care and getting everything just right. If that's something you guys would be interested in seeing, let me know in the comment section below. With everything built and put together, all that was left to do was install Windows and play some games. But before I get into the benchmarks, I want to take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. I've been a user of Squarespace long before they were a channel sponsor. A while back when I had a business making and selling custom 3D printed phone cases, I used Squarespace because they did and still do have, in my opinion, the best e-commerce system available. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that handles all the confusing aspects of creating a website beyond just design, with stuff like SEO tools and a really robust set of analytics. If you're doing business online, you need a website, and Squarespace offers the best solutions available. I recently made a new website for myself that links all my different online presences into one central location. If you want to build a beautiful website and support the channel, then head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/techbymatt to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and now let's get on to the benchmarks. So I tested a few different games, nothing too hard to run, and I tried to pick popular titles. Starting off with Fortnite at 1080p Pro settings, the system in a Team Rumbles match had an overall average in the mid-80s. There were some stutters, but overall the system did really well. In Rainbow Six at 1080p medium settings using the built-in benchmark, the system received a 97.4 FPS average, and again there were a few stutters, but overall this is pretty good performance for a $100 gaming PC. In PUBG at 1080p low settings, the system averaged just above 60 FPS, which was cool to see. Overall, things seemed pretty smooth, and while the game didn't look great, it performed just fine. Moving on to CSGO, which at 1080p Pro settings produced an overall average of around 110 FPS. This was a pretty smooth and enjoyable experience. Obviously, a lot of people prefer higher frame rates in CSGO, but for casual play, this worked fine. Finally, I tested Cod War Zone, which surprisingly worked on this system. I had to drop the settings to 720p low, but in most parts of the game, I was getting a 60 FPS average, which was great to see, and I was even able to get some kills. Overall, for $100, the system performs great. This definitely won't be playing modern AAA titles, but for esports gaming, this works fine. Taking a step back and looking at what I've created makes me pretty happy with the end result. Let me know what you guys did or didn't like about the system in the comment section below. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.